Hello everyone, I am Commander Kirby, and welcome to my channel, the Commander Tavern. The Commander Tavern is a channel dedicated to my favorite Magic the Gathering format. The Brewery is a series on this channel showcasing my spicy brews and other deck techs. On this episode of the Brewery, I'll be discussing my take on a commander from Duskborn, Niko, Light of Hope. If you like this deck or any of the cards I'll be mentioning throughout the video, please consider using my TCG Player affiliate link when purchasing those cards. You can find that link down in the description. It'll really help out the channel at no extra cost to you. But the very best way you can help support the channel is with my Patreon. There are plenty of perks for being a patron, such as early access to certain videos, exclusive deck techs, gifts, and more for as little as $1. You can also become a channel member for just 99 cents. Show off your support with a logo next to your name and exclusive emojis. Or you can always just support my channel for free by simply liking, subscribing, and sharing, which also helps out a lot. I put out a video every Monday, so you don't want to miss out. You can join my Discord server for free if you want to join the Commander Tavern community. All pertinent links are down in the description. Alright, let's get back to the episode. Niko is a 3/4 human wizard for 2 generic, 1 white and 1 blue. When they enter the battlefield, you create 2 shard tokens. While creating these superior clue type tokens might not seem that powerful, there's an activated ability that synergizes with them. For 2 and tapping, you delay blink target non-legendary creature you control. When you do, shards you control become copies of it until the beginning of your next end step. Fortunately, you don't need shard tokens to activate this ability, so you can always just use this to delay blink a non-legendary creature at instant speed, whether to protect it or get any leaves the battlefield or enter the battlefield triggers. However, since your shards can also become copies of that creature, this opens the door for tons of potential. Starting with the elephant in the room, the obvious include for this deck being Niko Aris. Apart from the commander, this is the only other card that creates shard tokens. Fortunately, it's an amazing mana sink since it creates X of them when entering the battlefield. Not only that, but you can also create them with the final loyalty ability. The other abilities are useful, such as the first one, which makes the creature you control unblockable that turn. Then when it deals combat damage, it gets bounced. This ability is absolutely insane in this deck. First, it almost guarantees getting any saboteur effect you might have. Then the creature is bounced, letting you recast it later for any ETB effect or getting any other trigger for leaving as well. The middle loyalty ability is quite niche but not entirely useless. However, we can also get shards indirectly thanks to Reborn Defenses, Caretaker's Talent, Muster the Departed, 3 Blind Mice, Nesting Dovehawk, and Astral Dragon. With how the deck is built, all of these cards are still amazing even without the shard tokens. However, with them, it's even better. Reborn Defenses populating is really just a bonus since the main point of running it is to make our board indestructible in response to a board wipe. That being said, we can also use this in response to bad blocks or if we really just want to copy a creature token. The deck still has other ways to protect our board, but this one is really good for this deck. The talent is amazing here because we draw a card whenever a token enters our control. Granted, it's only once per turn, but there are ways of creating tokens outside of our turn. It's when it becomes level 2 that we get to copy a token we control. Naturally, we're copying a shard token, unless there's something better. At level 3, it's yet another pump effect in the deck. This deck is actually an aggressive deck, so this will also help with that synergy. But I'll discuss the aggressive part of the deck later on. Suffice it to say, Caretaker's Talent is an all-star here. Muster the Departed creates a flying spirit when entering, but that's beside the point. At the end of our turn, we populate if a creature died that turn. Again, we want to populate shard tokens. Do keep in mind that they're enchantments and cannot be populated as is. They need to be a creature copy thanks to Niko first. 3 Blind Mice doesn't have that restriction, fortunately. If that weren't enough, its final chapter is yet another pump effect which is not irrelevant. If we manage to create a copy of this saga as well as Nesting Dovehawk, things get pretty insane. The reason why is because Nesting Dovehawk can simply populate copies of itself if it's a token. So if we have our shard token becomes copies of Nesting Dovehawk before combat, once the combat phase begins we can have each copy populate itself. These tokens entering will trigger all effects that care about ETB effects, including themselves. So each copy will get that many +1/+1 counters. This is definitely one of the best creatures in the deck, and it flies too, helping with the aggro strategy. Astral Dragon is also a flyer and it creates flyers too. The best thing about Astral Dragon is that it can create creature copies of the shards, making it easier to populate them. Not only that, but it does so with an enter the battlefield trigger, so delay blinking it with Niko provides even more advantage. So good. This dragon is also how we create token copies of 3 Blind Mice, which makes things get out of hand very quickly. Since each time the sagas create a token copy, you can have it choose itself, which will also create mice tokens when the copies enter the battlefield. Absolute insanity. Make sure to keep a calculator handy. An infinitely large or even just massively large board might be enough to win a game. However, we can still get incremental value the more a game progresses, especially since we have access to white to fill the board with tokens as well as pumping them, plus access to blue to protect said board. Thanks to that, the deck is running Banalish Marshal, Angel of Jubilation, Sublime Archangel, Thistledown Liege, Ultramarines Honor Guard, and Angel of Invention. While these aren't included necessarily due to any potential enter the battlefield shenanigans, having lots of shards become copies of pump effects makes our attacking army that much stronger. Sublime Angel sort of non-bows with that concept, since Exalted cares about a single attacker. But if we have a large enough Niko that's also unblockable, that might be a faster win than a bunch of token copies. Having shards become copies of it makes the ability even more busted, since Exalted is a stackable effect. Hero of Bladehold also provides a pump effect, but apart from that, also creates attacking tokens. Having multiple shards become a copy of it means having multiple instances of Battlecry when they also attack, and creating even more attacking tokens. Speaking of attacking tokens, Master of Waves, Preston the Vanisher, Angelic Sellsword, Feywild Caretaker, and Overlord of the Mistmoors are ways to create even more tokens, making the deck even more aggressive. Master of Waves is such a great card to blink with Niko because it'll create more elementals when it returns to the battlefield. Fortunately, since state-based actions are checked after abilities resolves, our shard tokens will become copies of it before the elementals return to having 0 toughness. With enough shards, our elementals will have a massive boost. When the original returns, we'll create even more elementals. Preston cares about creatures entering without being cast, creating copies of it. This is insane here, copying anything we're blinking. This card is powerful on its own, so just imagine it here. The possibilities are endless. Angelic Sellsword creates mercenaries whenever it or other non-token creatures enter under our control. That's great if we manage to mass blink our creatures, but also because it'll trigger off of other creatures apart from itself. These mercenaries can be used to pump an attacker that goes through, or even the angel if we really need to draw that card. Feywild Caretaker gives us the initiative when it enters, which is super good here. Whenever we lose the initiative, we can simply blink it. If that wasn't enough, if we have it at the end of our turn, we create a 1/1 flyer. Undercity is an amazing dungeon to venture through multiple times, considering that it has so many amazing rooms. So much so that Radiant Solar is also included in the deck. This will trigger off of itself and other non-token creatures entering. If we have a ton of shards to be copies of it, then a single creature entering the battlefield afterwards might be enough to complete whatever dungeon we're currently in. Not only that, but unlike Feywild Caretaker, if we're no longer in Undercity when we venture, we can choose different dungeons to do so. Speedrunning through Lost Mine of Found Delver is amazing for all the value we get from it, but you can also choose any of the other remaining dungeons. I just love Radiant Solar as a card and it does unbelievable work here. Don't sleep on it. Last but not least, the Overlord creates 2/1 flyers when it enters as well as when it attacks. These are my favorite creatures to copy with the shards. First, we get the flyers when it enters, so we get value delay blinking it with Niko. Then, when the shards become copies of it, we get that same value because we also get the trigger when they attack. So good. We can also cast this earlier via Impending, and then once it's a creature, we can delay blink it. Or, if it's just an enchantment, Astral Dragon can choose it when creating token copies. I'm telling you, there's synergy abound in this deck, way more than I have time to cover. Returning to pump effects, Escarpment Fortress also provides some as well as card advantage. Having multiple copies of it not only pumps power by a bunch, but we also draw a bunch of cards. We can also draw a bunch of cards thanks to Overlord of the Flood Pits, All-Seeing Arbiter, and Ethereal Valkyrie. As I just mentioned, my favorite creatures for this Niko are those that have both an ETB trigger as well as an attack trigger. We don't get the ETB triggers with the shards becoming that creature, but we do get the attack triggers. Thanks to these creatures, we get to draw when they return after being delay blinked with Niko, but also when we attack with the shard copies of them. So good. Battle Angels of Tyr is also included for something similar, but it doesn't have an ETB trigger. It does have Myriad though, killing 2 birds with 1 stone. Even if we're not behind any opponents to take advantage of the combat damage triggers, we'll still get tokens when it attacks. Tokens that we can hopefully copy or proliferate before they go away, allowing us an even stronger army. Just imagine having a ton of shards become copies of this and then swing at opponents. Again, keep your calculator handy. However, instead of relying on these saboteurs for card advantage, the deck also has Biden of Thassa, Coastal Piracy, Enduring Curiosity, Reconnaissance Mission, the Indomitable, and Deep Fathom Skulker. These all have the same trigger where we draw a card whenever a creature we control deals combat damage to a player. With an aggressive deck like this one with a lot of evasion, we'll be drawing a ton of cards. However, 2 of these effects are found on non-legendary creatures. So if we manage to have our shards become copies of either Enduring Curiosity or Deep Fathom Skulker, we'll draw even more cards during combat. Obviously, with multiples of these in play, it'll be insane. That's why the deck is running Reliquary Tower. Ignore all of the hate concerning this card. It does not take up space in your deck, and you don't need to min-max color availability for a 2-colored commander deck like this one. If you draw your deck, you will draw a ton of cards with it. Going back to the Skulker, for 3 generic and 1 colorless, we can make a creature unblockable. Good thing that Reliquary Tower can tap for colorless, huh? Speaking of unblockability, effects such as those found on Archetype of Imagination and Sen Xuan Lord of Wu further guarantee our attackers get through. With a large enough board or enough power, any of these will essentially close out the game. Unless the defending player has a ton of creatures with reach or horsemanship, it's game over. Most of the creatures in the deck already have some form of evasion, but making a 21 plus power Niko get through or a game-ending wave of attackers, you'll be happy you'll have these. If for nothing else, then to at least guarantee those attack and combat damage triggers. Besides drawing cards and making tokens, we can also use ETB and or Saboteur effects to disrupt our opponents as well as interacting with them. Of note are Sludge Monster and Frost Titan. Like I mentioned earlier, the best kind of effects for Niko are creatures with both ETB and attack triggers. The monster puts slant counters on creatures. Non-horror creatures with slant counters are 2/2s without any abilities. This won't necessarily get rid of our opponent's creatures, but we nerf any huge threats as well as disable any utility creatures. The Titan also does something similar by tapping down huge threats with the potential attackers against us or good blockers too. Then they stay tapped at the next untap step. If we continue freezing down creatures this way when it returns to the battlefield or when our shards become copies of it, it makes it even harder to deal with us. Sun Titan also does something similar but for recovering our cheap cards and lands in the graveyard. Being able to recover things on ETB is already good, but when our shards become copies of it, it's even better. The deck is running all 7 fetch lands, so if nothing else, we can recover our fetch lands and use them in response to any other triggers since they return untapped. Imagine having a couple of these in your graveyard and then getting them back untapped. The deck is running 6 dual type lands as well as 6 of each basic land, so you'll definitely have enough targets for your fetch lands to make the most of this. The craziest thing is that this isn't even the deck's main mana acceleration suite. It just happens that fetch lands love Sun Titan, so you can make the absolute most of it. The deck is still running Scampering Surveyor and Solemn Simulacrum in order to make the most of the blink and copy effects to get ahead with mana. But we'll see the rest of the mana acceleration pieces later. The important part is that Sun Titan is busted here and these ramping golems are also good. Returning to interaction, Skyclave Apparition, Witch Enchanter, and Duplicant are amazing here for the same reason that Scampering Surveyor and Solemn Simulacrum are. We don't necessarily want our shards to become copies of them, but if we're able to blink them or copy them in a pinch, they become even more troublesome for our opponents. The middle one doesn't even take up a slot in the deck since we can play it as an untapped land if we miss our land drop. Thing in the Ice though, that is a creature we want to copy with our shards. The copies won't have any ice counters on them. Therefore, once they're a copy of it, we just need to cast a single instant or sorcery to bounce the board of all non-horror creatures on it. Also, thanks to tokens now retaining any double-faced properties, the shard tokens will transform into Awoken Horror. With enough shard tokens, we can clear the board of any blockers and swing in with Total Abandon with a bunch of 7/8s. So good. With so many ETB effects, you know the deck is running Brago King Eternal. Especially since the deck also has a ton of ways to make creatures unblockable, and he also flies anyways. Being able to blink as many non-land permanents as we want when he connects is absolutely busted here. Blinking Niko gets us more shards, but we can also blink ETB creatures for further value. We can even blink the overlords that still have time counters in order for them to enter without them becoming creatures. With Preston in play, we create token copies of all the non-token creatures returning. Brago is already a busted commander, but is also busted here in the 99. Apart from all the synergistic card advantage, interaction, and mana acceleration already presented, you still need tried and true ways to deal with opponents' nonsense. To that end, the deck is running Fierce Guardianship, An Offer You Can't Refuse, Swan Song, Counterspell, Davan's Veto, Mana Drain, Negate, Permission Denied for its Counterspell suite. We need to stop any board wipes from resolving once we have the strongest board. Could we run mass phasing out effects? Sure, but opponents also keep their things afterwards too anyways. And these also prevent combo players from stealing the victory from beneath our feet. But you can certainly run mass phasing out effects if you wanted to. Generous Gift, Stroke of Midnight, and Cyclonic Rift help round out the interaction, with overloading Cyclonic Rift being an obvious facilitator to an aggro deck. Remember, overload your Cyclonic Rifts and cast your Farewells wisely. Don't be that player. Lightning Greaves, Swiftfoot Boots, Champion's Helm, and Mithril Coat help protect our key creatures like Niko, Preston, Brago, etc. Just be careful with Lightning Greaves since it gives Shroud, preventing you from targeting your own creature. Wayfarer's Bauble and Navigation Orb provide more land-based ramp, which is key for non-green decks like this one. However, with the amount of counter spells the deck is running, you can risk running cost reduction effects like Pearl Medallion, Sapphire Medallion, and Grand Arbiter Augustin Ford. Yes, I know the salt factor for him is high, but this is not a stacks deck. So what if your opponent's spells cost 1 generic more to cast? Train them to get used to it for when they play against Rhystic Study, because you should always pay for Rhystic Study. The important thing is your white and blue spells cost less because we want as much advantage as possible. Soul Ring is the only other mana rock because Brago is in the 99 and not in the command zone. Otherwise, we could take advantage of blinking tapped mana rocks, but Soul Ring is good enough for that turn 3 Niko, as well as for activating. The rest of the deck is just the rest of the lands. Apart from all of the previously mentioned lands, the deck's running Deserted Beach, Flood Farm Verge, Glacial Fortress, Mystic Gate, Nimbus Maze, Sea of Clouds, Sky Cloud Expanse, Command Tower, and Ancient Tomb. As with all of my deck techs, you can build your mana base according to your budget. Whether you include more expensive cards or even cheaper cards is up to you. You do you. This brew is just an idea of how to build around Niko Light of Hope. What I love about this commander is that it's not just your run-of-the-mill Blink commander. There's the challenge of building around it and the shard tokens. How do we get shards? How do we maximize how many we have? How do we protect them once we have them? And that's what I base my goals when building this deck. Since it is such an open concept, let me know in the comments how you would build them. If you're interested in the deck list of this spicy brew of mine, you can find a link to it down in the description. I would like to thank all my patrons for supporting me, and a quick shout out to all my higher tier patrons, the brewers, for their patronage. I'd also like to thank anyone using my TCG Player affiliate link. That also helps out the channel. I also want to thank any channel members. Your membership is greatly appreciated. And to everyone, thanks for watching this episode of The Brewery on the Commander Tavern. I am the Bearded Kirby, and happy brewing.